Alright, I've done a whole bunch of videos today. I think I'm exhausted, kind of. So it's time for me to, I guess, wrap it up and get on with my day. Last video is going to be about the hypocrisy of Seventh-day Adventists. Why am I doing this? Seventh-day Adventists aren't really on my radar. They're really not. But because I see how there are Adventists in Christian communities posing as Christians, pretending to be Christians, but then just trying to promote their Sabbatarian beliefs. Well, as I see it, if somebody puts their hand in someone else's mailbox, the owner of the mailbox has every right to smash their fingers. So if Seventh-day Adventists want to come into Christian communities, and if a Christian calls them out, fine. That's exactly what I'm going to do. You should not have crossed that border. But I'm not going to sit and just stand by and just watch Sabbatarians try and push their New Age winds of doctrine. So let's deal with them. And for you Christians, you need to recognize them and understand a few things. Number one, Sabbatarians don't know the scriptures. I'm just telling you straight up. What they are doctrinized people, basically brainwashed. They're told one thing over and over and over and over: the Sabbath, the Sabbath, the Sabbath, the Sabbath. And that's all they really talk about. I've never heard a Sabbatarian talk about, gospel of Jesus, It's always just the Sabbath. And sometimes meat, like what to eat, what not to eat. It's because they're doctrinized over a particular thing. They will go around saying, no, we teach other stuff. No, a tree is known by its fruits. If a Pentecostal was always talking about holiness to God and repentance, abstaining from sin, but a Sabbatarian is always talking about the Sabbath. Number one, they didn't even exist since Christianity. They're less than 300 years old. The scriptures do say in the last days, new winds of doctrines and fables will come up. By all intents and purposes, this is a new age religion. Gentile Sabbatarians did not exist. Number one. The biggest whammy is the Sabbath is for Israel, and Israel only. Multiple scriptures show that the Sabbath is a sign between the descendants of Jacob and God for all their generations. Gentiles have nothing to do with the Sabbath. It's evident in the fact that Judaism has never pushed the law. And by the way, the law is not the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments is part of the entire 613. It's not meant to be 10 here and 603 over there. It's all the law. Seventh-day Adventists do not observe the law. But Judaism has never pushed the law on Gentiles. The only time they require Gentiles to observe the law is when they convert to Judaism. It's the same thing, we see that in the New Testament. When a stranger wants to be part of Israel, whatever, they basically convert, and then they have to observe all the things that Moses commanded. The law. It's the same thing, but otherwise, Jews do not push the law on Gentiles like ever. That should tell you something. Another thing is, for Christians, Acts 15 is very clear. Perfect opportunity for Peter, James, Paul, Barnabas, the elders, the entire church to push the law on Gentile converts. And they refused to. In fact, Peter said to do that is to anger the Lord. Paul said, I don't frustrate the gospel of Jesus. Because if the law could save, then Christ has died in vain. That's what he said. The entire book of Romans deals with this. So Sabbatarians just don't understand the scriptures at all. Ellen G. White, she's a proven plagiarist and liar. How can you say you get everything from God? You get your visions and your inspirations from God. But then it's proven you actually plagiarized from other people's work and from paintings that you saw. By any definition, that is a plagiarist and a liar. Seventh-day Adventists try and say, okay, well, the law of plagiarism didn't exist. I don't care. I don't care if the rules for plagiarism existed or not. If somebody says they got it from God, but it's proven they got it from other people's work and paintings, it's a lie. She didn't get it from God if it exists in other people's writings that predate hers. That's a silly way to actually try and justify her lies. Another thing that's very important for you Christians to understand is that Seventh-day Adventists are not your brethren just because they worship on the Sabbath. No, it's worse than that. They actually say that you have the mark of the beast, which means you're basically a Satanist. Why they pretend to be Christians when they're telling you Christians that you are Satanists? Don't fall for their lies and their tricks. They say you have the mark of the beast because you worship on Sunday. So, they're not your brethren. They are not Christians. Also, keep in mind, the church has always rejected Seventh-day Adventists as a cult. It never accepted them as part of the Christian body. They call themselves Christians, so what? KKK call themselves Christians. So what? Just because they call themselves that doesn't make them that. Doesn't make them part of this fold. No. And also understand that if there's one type of belief system that has split and splintered so many times because of doctrinal errors and doctrinal differences, it's the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And that's important too. Because if they have this belief and other people in their organization doesn't believe it, they say, no, that's not right. So they basically split. The problem is the ones who are our brethren, they still call themselves Seventh-day Adventists. So you can't distinguish one from the other concerning their title. You have to wait until they start spewing their doctrinal beliefs. Because again, a tree is known by its fruit, not by its title. So once they start spewing their doctrinal beliefs, then you're like, okay, well, we know what type of Sabbatarian you are. You're either a brethren of us, or you're not a brethren of us. So that's just a little bit I want to say about Seventh-day Adventists. For whatever reason, they're coming out of the woodworks. They're all through Christian communities. And you can know who they are. Again, a tree is known by its fruits. I've had to refute Sabbatarians in the past, Seventh-day Adventists. And two friends. One was actually the ex-girlfriend of my best friend. Another guy was kind of like more like an acquaintance. They got together, boyfriend and girlfriend. I know that the female is not a Christian, but she goes to church. She has Christian beliefs, Christian foundations. The other guy, Seventh-day Adventist, he would complain to her, about Sunday worship, eating pork, blah 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 blah. And I was overseas at the time, and she's telling me about it. I didn't know who the guy was. I couldn't picture, his name and his face. I couldn't match them. But when I was back home, and I was sitting outside City Hall, and he came, we were just talking, catching up. I hadn't seen him in years. And then he was telling me how, he's like, something about having a baby with, the person's name. I was like, wait a minute. You are, her boyfriend? He's like, yeah. As soon as he said that, everything she told me just came flooding in. And I laid it on him thick. I laid it on him thick. I started telling him that he's wrong. You're talking about dietary and ceremonial laws, but you've got this girl pregnant. And you're not married. So you're telling me that fornication, which is a moral sin that sends people to hell, but yet ceremony and dietary laws would never send anybody to hell or send them to heaven. You're telling me fornication is less than this stuff? You think a day and food is going to send you to heaven or hell, but you're doing something that's A sexual sin? Oh, I laid it to him thick. The only thing he could do was look down at the ground. Thinking back, I can tell now that's the anger of the Lord when I was talking to him. At the time, I was because I felt it, like this guy's judging her over petty things, but he got her pregnant, which means he's having sexual intercourse with her outside of marriage. A far worse sin than days and foods. So yeah, I've had to lay into Sabbatarians like that because they're doctrinized, they're brainwashed. Sabbath, Sabbath, Sabbath. If you do observe the Sabbath, you're okay. No, you're not. Oh no, you're not. So anyway, they also will believe what the Catholics say. The Catholics have this lie in the 18th and the 19th century, saying that the Sabbath was changed, as I mentioned earlier. That's the 18th and 19th century. But the first century church said they gathered on the 8th day, and they gathered on the first day, which they call the Lord's Day, which is the day Jesus rose from the dead. The first century church even said that they no longer observe the Sabbath, but observe the Lord's Day. The church didn't observe the Sabbath. The Sabbath is unto Israel and Israel alone. And what they trying to do is they would show Jews of Judaism Old Testament scriptures. And then they were trying to show Jewish Christians in the New Testament what the Jewish Christians did. Well, how do you expect the Jewish Christians, who have every right to observe the Sabbath and Jewish customs, which the Bible calls customs, not because the law says it, it calls it their custom. They have every right to observe the Sabbath. Furthermore, how else is a Jewish Christian going to even reach the Orthodox Jews other than going to the temple on the Sabbath? That's where they were gathered. That's the perfect opportunity for them to go and preach the gospel, and that's what they did. But Seventh-day Adventists would say, well, look, they're observing the Sabbath. No, they wasn't. These were Jewish Christians going into the Jewish temple on the Jewish Sabbath so they can preach the gospel to their fellow Jews. But when it comes to the church started on Sunday. Day of Pentecost. It's called Pentecostal SUNDAY for a reason. Sabbatarians don't seem to know this. The Holy Spirit came on that Sunday. The first gospel message was preached on that Sunday. The first converts into Christianity converted on that Sunday by the thousands. Jesus rose on the Sunday. Jesus visited the followers on a Sunday. He waited a week and visited his disciples again the next Sunday. Tithes, the only example of tithes being gathered is on a Sunday. The only example of the church observing the Lord's Supper, breaking of bread, is on Sunday. 9 scriptures that clearly show the church began and continued on Sunday. And these Sabbatarians tell you that you're Satanist because you worship on the Sunday. Well, I'm sorry, but the church has been doing that for 2,000 years. If you don't like it, get out of the Christian communities and stop pretending to be a Christian. You've been a cult from the beginning. We rejected you from the beginning, and we reject you this very hour.